The summer of 1794 in Paris burned not only with heat, but also with a feverish tension, akin to a fever slowly and surely consuming the doomed. The second year of the Republic, year 2 by the new calendar, marked by blood, fear, and paranoid suspicion, was nearing its climax. Through the hazy, suffocating days of Thermidor, the outlines of an approaching storm could be discerned, capable of engulfing even those who seemed to hold its most terrible lightning bolts. Maximilien Robespierre, the Incorruptible, high priest of the revolution, its formidable prophet, stood atop a pyramid constructed from corpses and utopian ideals. But beneath his feet, beneath the monolithic foundation of the Committee of Public Safety, cracks were already creeping, foreshadowing an inevitable collapse. He was exhausted. His face, once marked by the seal of determination and unwavering faith, was now haggard, acquiring an earthy hue, and his eyes, usually brilliant with penetrating intellect, had dulled from insomnia and nervous strain. The last few weeks had been an unbearable torment for him. Imaginary enemies, real conspirators, the whisper of suspicion that echoed through the deserted halls of the convention, all merged into one agonizing hum that gave him no peace. His triumph, the grandiose festival of the Supreme Being, which he himself led, holding a torch meant to symbolize purification, turned into a grim omen. Then, on the Champ de Mars, beneath the enthusiastic and at times mocking gazes of the crowd, Robespierre seemed to soar above the earth, becoming the embodiment of a new cult, a new order. But this ascent was too swift, too arrogant. And the whisper that then reached his ears, "He wants to become God," was the first alarming bell. Robespierre felt the ground slipping from beneath his feet. Comrades who once followed him now turned away. A coalition against him grew, fueled by fear, envy, and simple weariness of the endless stream of executions. The remnants of the Hébertists, whose voices had been silenced by the guillotine, the Dantonists, whose flesh had been fed to the mob, their specters roamed the corridors of power, uniting around themselves those who had thus far escaped the blade, but knew that tomorrow could be their turn. Joseph Fouché, Barras, Talleyrand, these predators whose hands were elbow-deep in blood, now felt that their own lives depended on the fall of the Incorruptible. Their fear was his mirror, but their resolve surpassed his. 8 Thermidor, July 26, 1794. This day began like hundreds of others, but concluded with the omen of doom. Robespierre addressed the convention with his last, most fatal speech. His voice was hoarse, and his speech verbose and vague, yet permeated with a venomous threat. He spoke of conspiracies, of internal enemies, of the necessity of further purification, of traitors permeating all branches of government, including the Committee of Public Safety, but he named no names. This ambiguity became his death sentence. Every deputy in the hall, from the most influential to the least, trembled for his life, for each could be that very traitor whose name Robespierre kept on his bloody list. This refusal of specifics, an attempt to make everyone fear and submit, instead united them against him. They all felt targeted. They all understood, if not him, then them. Initially, the speech was met with applause, but it was the applause of fear. Then, as Robespierre's words spread through the corridors of power, the atmosphere began to change. That night, as darkness deepened over Paris and scattered lights flickered in house windows, deputies gathered for secret meetings. Throughout the night, in the suburbs and back streets of Paris, intrigues were spun, bloody alliances forged. Robespierre, exhausted, almost mad from insomnia, tried to mobilize his supporters in the Jacobin Club. There, under the dim light of lamps, his speech found resonance, but it was merely an echo of a fading era. In the streets, in taverns, in rich mansions and squalid hovels, Parisians felt something was brewing. The air was charged with anticipation. The morning of 9 Thermidor, July 27, 1794, was humid and oppressive. A gray shroud hung over the city, promising imminent rain. In the convention, as soon as the bell rang, summoning the deputies, an ominous premonition was already palpable. The tribunes were overflowing, the crowd pressed in, eager to witness the inevitable. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, cheap tobacco, and fear. Antoine Saint-Just, young, almost androgynous, yet mortally dangerous comrade of Robespierre, attempted to begin his speech, but he was interrupted. Voices, timid at first, then growing louder, rolled through the hall. "Down with the tyrant! Danton's blood chokes him! Arrest him!" Cries came from all sides, overlapping, creating a frenzied cacophony. Robespierre tried to speak. He ascended the tribune, his face contorted with fury and despair. He opened his mouth, but words caught in his throat, stifled by the roar of the crowd. He who once commanded the masses was now powerless before them. He moved from one tribune to another, his fingers scraping the wood, his gaze darting, searching for a single friendly soul. But there was no one. He was alone against all, surrounded by predatory gazes, lusting for his blood. He seemed to lose his voice, his once powerful timbre devolving into a strained rasp. "President of assassins, will you not let me speak?" he cried, his eyes bloodshot. But the president, Collot d'Herbois, did not listen. Finally, the verdict was pronounced. A decree of accusation against Robespierre, Saint-Just, Couthon, Lebas, and his own brother, Augustin Robespierre. It was passed almost unanimously, silencing the last weak protests. The escort seized Robespierre. His pale face, his unmoving gaze as he was led from the hall, left a deep impression on eyewitnesses. At that moment, he seemed to transform from an all-powerful dictator into a mere mortal, a prisoner of fate. But it was not yet the end. The Paris Commune, always loyal to Robespierre, rose up. Section leaders, sans-culottes, and National Guard, all were set in motion. Robespierre and his comrades were freed from prisons and taken to the Hôtel de Ville, the City Hall building. The night of 9 to 10 Thermidor was a time of tragic indecision. Chaos reigned in the Hôtel de Ville. Robespierre, paralyzed by shock and fatigue, could not make a decision. His hand had not trembled when he sent Danton, Hébert, his former friends, to the guillotine. But now, when the revolution demanded action from him personally, he hesitated. He refused to sign an appeal for insurrection until he received legal authorization from his supporters in the convention, who were no longer there. He could not comprehend that at that moment he himself was the law, but his legalistic pedantry proved fatal. Outside the windows of the City Hall, a thunderstorm raged. Rain lashed the cobblestones, washing away dust and blood, cooling hot heads. The squares around the Hôtel de Ville, once filled with crowds, were almost empty. Soldiers who had come to support the Commune stood, soaking in the rain, awaiting an order that never came. Their resolve melted away with the passing hours of the night. Meanwhile, the convention acted swiftly. Declaring Robespierre and his supporters outlaws, they appointed Barras, a man of few principles, but with an iron will and an excellent nose for power, to lead the convention's forces. By 2 o'clock in the morning, the convention's forces, led by Barras and Bourdon of Oie, approached the Hôtel de Ville. The doors were open. The guards, weary from waiting and soaked to the bone, had dispersed. The assault began, but it was not an assault so much as an invasion, of an empty, ghostly house. Inside, in one of the rooms where a fire had just raged, Robespierre sat at a table, leaning over a map according to one version. According to another, he was trying to write a proclamation. Suddenly, a shot rang out. Who pulled the trigger? Historians still debate. Perhaps he himself, attempting suicide but clumsily. Perhaps one of the convention soldiers whose shot found its mark. The bullet shattered his left jaw. He fell, bleeding profusely, his face contorted with unbearable pain. Nearby, in the same chaos, Lebas, another loyal comrade, indeed committed suicide by shooting himself in the head. Augustin Robespierre, his brother, threw himself from a window, but survived, suffering only severe fractures. Couthon, paralyzed, fell down the stairs, sustaining multiple injuries. This was the end. The palace, which was supposed to be the citadel of their resistance, had turned into a trap. The wounded, half-dead Robespierre was taken to the Committee of Public Safety, to the very room where only yesterday he had shaped the destinies of France. He lay on the table where he usually signed execution orders, amidst papers, quills, and empty bottles, soaked in his own blood. A crowd of officers and soldiers, former colleagues and merely curious onlookers, gathered around him to gape at the toppled tyrant. His face was pale, his eyes closed. Through his torn shirt, a wound was visible, from which blood slowly seeped. His shattered jaw hung loose, exposing his teeth and part of his tongue. The sight was repulsive. They placed him on a wooden table, propped against a bread-filled crate. People came and went to see him, to mock him. "Monsieur Robespierre," one of the guards uttered, feigning a respectful bow, "your country thanks you." Someone else, more blunt, cried, "Go on, butcher! You will know Danton's fate." He, the Incorruptible, lying there, could hear these words penetrating through the veil of pain and shock. He could not speak, could not reply, only slowly opened and closed his eyes as if trying to grasp the reality of his situation. His once impeccable blue frock coat, a symbol of his modesty and purity, was now stained with blood and dirt. Someone, in mockery, placed a pistol next to his head, perhaps the very one from which the shot had been fired. Another mocker, passing by, prodded him with his foot. An army surgeon arrived, a certain Anik. With an indifferent, professional demeanor, he examined the wound. Robespierre silently offered him a small wad of cotton, which he held in his hand. Anik, without a word, took the wad and carefully but firmly inserted it into the opening in his mouth to stop the bleeding. Then he bandaged Robespierre's head with a coarse white bandage, tying it under his chin to somewhat stabilize the broken jaw. This was not aid, but merely preparation for the execution, so that the victim could survive until it. The pain must have been unbearable, but Robespierre remained stoically silent. Blood seeped through the bandage, slowly staining the white cloth crimson. This agonizing night passed in humiliation and physical suffering. Outside the windows of the committee on Rue Saint-Honoré, a crowd had gathered. Rumors spread like wildfire. Parisians who only yesterday feared even whispering his name now came out into the streets to witness the tyrant's fall. Some danced, others shouted with joy, still others simply stood, disbelieving what was unfolding. The air was filled with a mixture of schadenfreude, relief, and a new, fragile hope. The morning of 10 Thermidor, July 28, 1794, dawned over Paris, washed by rain and steeped in blood. The procession of the condemned, led by Robespierre, was to set off for the guillotine. Wounded, he was dragged from the committee and loaded into the cart intended for criminals. He sat there, pale, his head bandaged, in his blood-soaked frock coat. Beside him were Saint-Just, whose face maintained an almost ethereal calm despite impending death, Couthon helplessly contorted in the cart, as well as Augustin Robespierre, his brother, covered in plaster and bandages after his fall, and 19 others, condemned without trial as outlaws. The carts moved slowly through the streets of Paris towards the Place de la Révolution, formerly Place Louis XV, now Place de la Concorde. It was a triumphant march of retribution. Thousands came out to see the spectacle. This was no longer the crowd that had acclaimed him at the festival of the Supreme Being. This was a crowd thirsting for blood, thirsting for vengeance. Women from the revolution section, the very furies who had once enthusiastically cried, "Long live Robespierre," now laughed maliciously and applauded. Someone threw a stone at him. Someone spat. The sounds of curses and triumphant shouts mingled with the dull rumble of wheels on the cobblestone street. The crowd's particular attention was drawn to the house of Carpenter Duplay on Rue Saint-Honoré, where Robespierre lived. The residents of the house were likely hiding in fear, but the crowd demanded a spectacle. One of the soldiers, under orders from above, climbed onto the house facade and tore down the sign bearing the name Robespierre. Robespierre, seeing this, slowly opened his eyes and, despite the terrible pain, let out a sort of dull, stifled moan, the first and only one he uttered publicly in all those hours. It was a moan of despair, of the realization of the complete collapse of everything he had believed in and everything he had built. Finally, the carts arrived at the Place de la Révolution. The humid air permeated with the smell of fresh sawdust and anticipated blood. The guillotine rose above the square, its red wood ominously bright against the gray sky. It waited. It awaited the foremost of its creators. The executions began. Couthon went first. His paralyzed body had to be literally dragged and positioned onto the plank. Then Saint-Just, without flinching, ascended the steps, his young, handsome face stony, serene. One by one, heads fell. The screams of the crowd intensified with each fall of the blade. Then came Augustin Robespierre's turn. His head, wrapped in bandages, was almost unrecognizable. Finally, Maximilien Robespierre was brought forward. He was led to the scaffold, where executioner Charles-Henri Sanson awaited with his assistants. They seized him firmly. At the last moment, before placing him on the plank, Sanson tore off the bloody bandage from his jaw. At that moment, as Robespierre's shattered jaw dropped, he let out a monstrous, strange scream, which, according to eyewitnesses, was so piercing and full of agony that it echoed across the entire square, silencing the crowd for a moment. It was a scream encompassing all his pain, all his despair, all the fury and horror of his last moments. Then followed a dull thud. The blade whistled through the air, and with a sickening crunch, fell upon his neck. The head of Maximilien Robespierre, the incorruptible, chief architect of the terror, rolled into the basket. Sanson picked it up, bloody, with open eyes and mouth, and displayed it to the triumphant crowd. Thousands of voices erupted in a jubilant roar, mixed with jeers and applause. It was the sound of liberation, the sound of the nightmare's end. It was the sound by which the revolution devoured its last, most fervent son. Robespierre's decapitated body, along with the others, was thrown into a common grave at Errancy Cemetery, covered with quicklime, so that no trace of him would remain. Thus ended an era. With Robespierre's death, the terror immediately subsided, though purges continued for some time. Paris breathed a sigh of relief, but the price paid for this relief was immense. Maximilien Robespierre remained in history as a symbol of the revolution's contradictions. A man who began as a fiery defender of human rights and ended as a ruthless dictator whose name became synonymous with terror. His fall was not merely the death of a man, but also the end of illusions that once propelled France towards liberty, equality, and fraternity, yet led it into a bloody abyss. His last days were an epitaph to an era in which ideals drowned in blood, and justice turned into a monstrous reprisal. And the dead Robespierre, like the dead Danton, like the dead Haggard, became just another brick in the bloody foundation upon which a new France was to be built.